She told me, "Don't do that." Just 3 words, but the way she said them changed everything. I didn't know it then, but that moment would be the start of something I never expected, and could never forget. I never really thought much about helping her. It started like something small, casual, just one of those things you do for someone you've known long enough to care about, but not so long that you know every corner of their story. She was a friend of a friend, someone I'd grown used to seeing around, and I didn't think twice when I offered to carry a couple of boxes from her car into the house. The sun was low that day, spilling a soft, golden light across her front yard, catching in the strands of her dark hair. She moved with a kind of quiet grace, the way people do when they've long since stopped caring about rushing. I remember thinking she made even something as ordinary as sorting through cardboard look intentional. I bent down to lift another box, heavier than the rest, and out of instinct, I shifted my weight like I always do, about to swing it up onto my shoulder. That's when I felt it, a hand, light but firm, on my wrist. "Don't do that," she said. Her voice wasn't harsh. It wasn't even particularly commanding. But it stopped me in a way nothing else could have. I looked at her, surprised, and she shook her head gently. "You'll hurt your back lifting it like that," she added, her lips curving in a half-smile that made it hard to tell whether she was scolding me or protecting me. For a second, I just stood there, the box hanging useless in my arms, aware of how warm her touch felt through the thin fabric of my sleeve. She withdrew her hand slowly, as if realizing she had lingered a beat too long. "I didn't mean to," she started, then shrugged lightly, letting the sentence fade into the summer air. But I was still caught on that moment, her hand, the sound of her voice, the way time seemed to pause between us. I laughed, trying to shake off the tension. "Guess I've been doing it wrong all these years." Her eyes met mine, and for just a breath, it felt like she was looking right through me. Then she smiled again, softer this time, and said, "Maybe some habits aren't worth keeping." We carried the rest of the boxes inside without much more conversation. But the silence wasn't empty, it was charged, like the air just before a summer storm. Every time I caught a glimpse of her, moving past me in the hallway, brushing a strand of hair out of her face, I felt that same lingering warmth spread in my chest. It wasn't about the box, or even the way she stopped me. It was about the way she said it, firm enough to make me listen, gentle enough to make me want to. And though I didn't realize it then, that was the beginning. The first pause. The first thread of something I didn't have words for yet, but already couldn't ignore. Later that week, I found myself at her house again. I told myself it was just coincidence, that I was simply dropping something off I had borrowed, but if I'm being honest, I wanted to see her. There was a steadiness about her, a kind of presence that stayed with me long after I left. She opened the door with a surprised smile, brushing her hair back with the back of her hand. "You didn't have to come all the way over," she said, but her tone carried more warmth than protest. Before I knew it, I was sitting at her kitchen table, a mug of tea warming my hands. She had insisted, "If you're here, you might as well sit for a minute." And the truth was, I didn't want to leave. The kitchen was cozy, the kind of space that felt lived in, where the light over the stove hummed faintly and the scent of chamomile floated in the air. She sat across from me, her elbows resting lightly on the table, her shoulders gradually softening as she talked. We started with small things, her mentioning the book she was halfway through, me talking about work. But before long, the conversation slowed into silences that weren't awkward at all. Instead, they felt like resting places, as if either of us needed to fill every gap with words. I noticed little details. The way her fingers wrapped around her cup, the faint laugh lines at the corner of her mouth, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about something she cared about. At one point, our hands almost touched on the table. Mine moved slightly toward the sugar jar, hers shifted toward her cup. For a moment, our fingers hovered just inches apart. We both paused, as if caught in the same invisible current, before quietly retreating. She chuckled softly. "I think I talk too much sometimes," she said, glancing down. "You don't," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "I like listening." that made her lift her eyes back to mine. There was something searching in her gaze, as if she were trying to decide whether she could believe me. The lamplight between us made her eyes shimmer, and for a second, I forgot to breathe. She leaned back slightly, her lips curving into a small, almost shy smile. "You're kind. Too kind, maybe. Or maybe just honest," I said. The silence that followed was deeper than the ones before. It wasn't about comfort anymore, it was about awareness. I became sharply conscious of how close she was, of the way her voice lingered in my chest, of the quiet tension threading itself through the room. When I left that night, the air outside felt cooler than when I had arrived. But inside me, everything was warm, alive, and unsteady. I didn't just enjoy our conversation. I carried it with me. Every word, every pause, every almost touch. And for the first time, I wondered if she did too. It was a rainy evening the next time I saw her. Not the dramatic, thunder-filled kind of rain, but the steady, quiet kind that makes the world feel smaller, softer. Her living room window was blurred with droplets, the sound of them tapping against the glass filling the silence between us. She had made tea again, and I sat across from her on the couch. There was something different about her that night. Her posture wasn't as straight, her usual calmness edged with a faint restlessness. I noticed it in the way her fingers traced absent circles on her mug. "People assume I have everything figured out," she said suddenly, her eyes still fixed on the rain outside. I looked at her, caught off guard by the weight in her voice. She let out a short laugh, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Truth is, I don't. Not even close." I wanted to say something, anything that would soften whatever she was feeling. But the words tangled before they reached my mouth. Instead, I leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on my knees, waiting for her to go on. She glanced at me then, as if measuring whether it was safe to continue. Her gaze lingered, and in that moment I felt both the distance between us and the closeness she was allowing me. "I'm supposed to know better by now," she murmured. "Supposed to be wiser, stronger. But some days, it's exhausting just keeping up that image." I swallowed hard, the ache in her words settling deep in my chest. My instinct was to reach out, to take her hand, to show her she didn't need to carry that weight alone. But I stopped myself, my fingers curling into my palms. She had just shared a piece of herself she usually kept hidden. I didn't want to scare it away with too much. "I don't think anyone really has it figured out," I said carefully. "Some are just better at pretending." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, and for a moment, I thought I saw relief flicker across her face. The rain outside grew heavier, streaking down the glass. The sound filled the silence as we sat there, both of us quietly aware of the truth that had been spoken aloud. Inside, though, I wrestled with my own thoughts. She was older, more experienced, someone who had lived through more than I had even begun to imagine. I should have felt small next to her wisdom. Instead, I felt drawn in, drawn to the cracks she was showing me, the humanness beneath the poise. Why did I want so badly to ease her burdens? Why did her vulnerability make me feel closer to her, rather than further away? I didn't have answers. All I knew was that the words she had spoken would stay with me, heavier than any silence we'd shared before. And as the rain kept falling, I realized that sometimes the most fragile truths are also the ones that pull two people quietly, irresistibly, together. A few days later, she invited me in with a box tucked under her arm. "I was sorting through some old things," she said, motioning toward the living room. "You might get a laugh out of these." We sat together on the couch, the box between us. She pulled out an old photo album, its leather cover worn soft at the edges. The pages creaked faintly as she opened it, revealing snapshots of a life that stretched back years before I'd even met her. Her laughter filled the room as she pointed at a picture of herself in her 20s, her hair wilder, her smile unguarded. "Look at that," she said, shaking her head. "I thought I knew everything back then." I leaned in closer to see, the faint scent of her perfume drifting toward me. Something light, floral, and warm, something I couldn't quite name but knew I'd remember. Our shoulders brushed as I tilted toward her, and though either of us moved away, I felt my pulse quicken. Honestly, I murmured, studying the younger version of her on the page. You don't look all that different. She gave me a look, half amused, half disbelieving. That's kind of you, but trust me, I do. I wanted to say more, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I noticed the faint curve of her smile, the way the light from the lamp caught in her hair. She turned another page, and I found myself less interested in the photographs than in the closeness of her. My arm brushed against hers again as I shifted, and this time the warmth stayed with me, humming under my skin. She must have felt it too, because she stopped mid-turn of a page and looked at me. For a moment neither of us spoke. Her eyes held mine, steady but searching, and in that space between us I felt everything unspoken pressing forward. Then softly, barely more than a whisper, she said, "Don't." The word carried no sharpness, no real warning. It was softer than that, almost like she was protecting us both from something we weren't ready to name. I swallowed, forcing myself to lean back slightly, to give her room. She smiled faintly, closing the album with a gentle thud. "Some memories are better left in the box," she said, her voice lighter now, as though nothing had passed between us. But I knew something had. The air still felt charged, alive with the almost touch that hadn't gone further. And though we sat there for a while longer, talking about trivial things and laughing at old photos, I couldn't shake the sound of her voice, gentle, careful, lingering in my chest. It wasn't rejection. It was something else entirely. A pause. A line drawn not to push me away, but maybe, to keep us both from falling too fast. And though we didn't move closer again that night, I carried that moment with me, the nearness, the look in her eyes, the unspoken possibility hovering just out of reach. It was bound to happen eventually. Up until then, the world outside her kitchen, her living room, her soft silences, it didn't matter. But life has a way of intruding, even into the spaces you want to keep untouched. I was at a cafe with a couple of friends one afternoon when one of them smirked and said, "You spend more time with her than with anyone your own age. What's that about?" He meant it as a joke, I think. His tone was light, teasing. But the words dug in deeper than I expected. I laughed it off, shook my head, pretended not to care. Still, all through the rest of that coffee and even long after, the comment stayed with me. Later that evening, when I stopped by her place, I carried that weight inside me. She was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through papers. The soft glow of the lamp spilled across her face, and the sight of her was enough to steady me. For a moment, the world outside didn't matter again. But then she looked up and asked, almost too casually, "Do you ever worry about what people think?" The words caught me by surprise. She didn't glance away, didn't smile it off. Her eyes held mine with an honesty that made my throat tighten. I hesitated, searching for the right answer. The safe answer. But none came. Finally, I exhaled and said softly, "I only worry about losing the time I get with you." Her lips parted, as if she hadn't expected me to say that. A flicker of something passed across her expression, relief, maybe, or fear, or both. She lowered her gaze, tracing the edge of a paper with her finger, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. Outside, the street was quiet. Through the window, I could see the faint glow of porch lights from the houses across the road. Inside, though, the silence between us was heavier than before, carrying all the questions neither of us dared to ask aloud. What if people noticed? What if they judged? What if the age gap was too wide for anyone else to understand? But sitting there, watching the way her hands stilled on the table, I realized something. None of that mattered as much as the way I felt right then. The world could whisper, could laugh, could raise its eyebrows. They didn't know the way she looked at me when she let her guard down. They didn't know the quiet steadiness I found in her company. She glanced back up at me finally, her eyes softer than before. "You shouldn't have to defend it," she murmured. "Maybe not," I said. "But I would." That made her smile, small, hesitant, but real. And in that moment, even with the weight of the outside world pressing in, I knew I'd carry it if it meant holding on to what we had. It happened on an evening that wasn't supposed to be anything special. She had called me because a shelf in her hallway had come loose, the screws barely hanging on. "If you have a minute," she'd said over the phone, "I could use your steady hands." I brought over my toolbox, thinking it would take no more than 10 minutes. But small things with her never stayed small. She stood nearby while I worked, steadying the ladder with one hand as I tightened the screws. I could feel her presence below me, not in a distracting way, but in a grounding way, like her being there was enough to keep me balanced. "Careful," she said softly as I leaned to one side. Her hand pressed more firmly against the ladder, her touch steady, her eyes fixed upward. I felt the quiet weight of her concern, and it was warmer than I expected. When I finally climbed down, I found myself standing closer to her than usual. The space between us was small, and she didn't move away. My arm brushed hers as I set the screwdriver back in the box, and instead of stepping back, she let her hand linger against my sleeve. It was such a small touch, barely there, but it burned through me like fire. I looked up, and she was already watching me. Her eyes were unguarded, searching, holding me in a way that made the room feel still. For a long second, either of us moved. The sound of the clock in the kitchen ticked faintly in the background, the kind of detail I only noticed because everything else had gone quiet. "You make it very hard not to care," she whispered. Her voice was low, almost as if she hadn't meant to say it aloud. But the words landed squarely in my chest, heavy and undeniable. I wanted to tell her I felt the same, that I had been carrying these unspoken feelings in every silence we shared, in every almost touch, in every lingering glance. But the words froze in my throat. I was afraid of saying too much, too soon, of breaking the delicate balance we had built. Instead, I let the moment speak for me. I didn't step back. I didn't pull away. I let her hand stay on my arm, let her eyes hold mine, let the silence stretch between us like a confession neither of us had to put into words. Finally, she blinked, her expression softening into something almost shy. She withdrew her hand slowly, smoothing her hair back as if nothing had happened. "Thank you for fixing that," she said, her voice steadier now. "Any time," I replied, though my voice was lower than usual. But when I left her house that night, the echo of her words stayed with me. "You make it very hard not to care." And I knew then, with absolute certainty, that caring wasn't something I could stop, even if I tried. The first chill of autumn had settled in the air when we found ourselves walking side by side one evening. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving the street washed in the soft glow of lampposts. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and fallen leaves, crisp and sharp in my lungs. We hadn't planned the walk. After dinner at her place, she suggested we stretch our legs, and I agreed without hesitation. It felt natural now, being near her, falling into step with her rhythm. The street was quiet, our footsteps the only sound echoing against the pavement. She laughed lightly at something I said, her head tipping back for just a second, the sound carrying in the cool night air. I caught myself watching her, not just the curve of her smile, but the way her laughter seemed to loosen something in me, like I could breathe more freely just by hearing it. As we walked, our hands brushed once. Then again. The third time, she didn't move hers away. Instead, her fingers lingered against mine, tentative but deliberate. Slowly, her hand slid into my palm, her thumb tracing once across my skin, light as a whisper. It was such a small thing, but it felt like a door opening. Neither of us spoke about it. We just kept walking, our joined hands swinging gently between us. The world didn't stop, the lamp still glowed, the night carried on. But for me, everything shifted. I glanced at her, and she met my eyes. There was no nervousness in her expression, no apology, only quiet acceptance. It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't fireworks or a kiss in the rain. It was better than that. It was steady. Real. Her grip tightened just slightly, enough to tell me she wasn't letting go. I thought about all the moments that had led us here, the first time she told me, "Don't do that," with her hand on my wrist, the quiet evenings over tea, the unspoken confessions we both pretended not to hear. Each moment had been a thread, weaving us slowly, carefully, into something we could no longer ignore. As we turned onto her street, she spoke softly, almost to herself. Sometimes, the best things aren't the ones we plan. I smiled, my thumb brushing against hers. Sometimes they're the ones we never expected. She looked at me then, her gaze warm, steady, and unafraid. And in that look I knew everything, every hesitation, every doubt, was worth it. Later, when I lay in bed replaying the night, one thought stayed with me above all the others. She once told me, "Don't do that." And I loved that she said it. Not because she stopped me, but because it meant she cared enough to hold me back when I was too close, too soon. And now, step by step, she was letting me in, her way, her pace. And that was enough. It wasn't the ending of a story. It was the beginning of ours.